Today I'm going to take a look at the second part of the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, The Rise of Tiamat. Rise of Tiamat was released in October of 2014, a couple months after its predecessor, Horde of the Dragon Queen. It was the continuation and the conclusion of the Tyranny of Dragons campaign. It's odd that they split these into two books, because usually they would just release a single 200-page book rather than two 100-page books, but I'm thinking that they weren't really sure of how they were going to do modules at the time. There are a couple similarities with the first book. The pages use the same type of matte paper, and the book is broken into episodes rather than chapters, but it plays out much differently from the Horde of the Dragon Queen. Let's take a look inside. So you can see that it is split into episodes, but as we get into this, you'll see that they use that term very loosely. The first part of this is the introduction, and this is much longer than the introduction in Horde of the Dragon Queen. Horde of the Dragon Queen, the entire introduction was 1 page. Here you actually have 13 pages where you go through an outline of the episodes. There's some side quests that you can perform. There's a description of the villains. There's a description of all of the different factions, including the NPCs that are important for each of those factions. And you'll find that factions are a significant part of this adventure. And then there's even some information about dragons and giants. So I'm very surprised at how much more information there is in the introduction in this book versus the first book. It seems like some of this information would have been important to have before you start the campaign, so it's odd that you don't get this information until you're halfway through. And then we're going to move on to the actual episodes, and let me just say that if you thought Princess of the Apocalypse was a wild ride through the book, it has nothing compared to this book. So we're going to start out in episode 1, and it quickly becomes apparent that using the term episode in this book is very misleading. The campaign expects that you're going to be jumping back and forth between these chapters as the adventure continues. This chapter is more the hub of the wheel, and as you do different things, you will go back and forth, and you will continuously return to this chapter for the next piece of the adventure. The recurring pattern is that there's this council going on in Waterdeep, and there are several different sessions that happen during the campaign. You basically do a session, which is a whole bunch of role-playing with the people in Waterdeep, and you determine where you're going to go next. And from each of these sessions, it directs you to the portions of the book where there's some additional encounters that you would do or adventures that you would go on. As part of this, the players are also working with a faction scorecard, and that is actually found in the back of the book. There's a scorecard here in the appendix. And as you complete quests, you keep track of how you did on that quest, and how you scored on the quest determines what kind of support you're going to get later on in the adventure from the different factions or from different NPCs. So at the first council, you're going to talk about what's going on in the world, and then you're going to get a couple quests. Now, you would think that since we're in chapter 1, that the next place we would go would be chapter 2, but no, we're going to skip over chapter 2, and we're actually going to go to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, you'll notice the important thing here is that chapter 3 is not just chapter 3, but it's also chapter 4. And it indicates that they did this because while it's two different sets of encounters, there's some kind of relationship to them, so they thought they would put them into the same section. Why they didn't just call it chapter 3, I don't know, but they decided that that was the way they were going to go with it. So in this chapter, you're tracking down Verum the White, whom it's believed has a dragon mask. And so you go to this location and you work your way through, and you're fighting a bunch of Wantees along the way. They hold him prisoner, and you eventually free him and find out that he does not actually have the mask. And then you move on to the next part of the adventure, which actually now is chapter 2. So we've finished chapter 3, and we're going to move back to chapter 2. And here we're going to the Sea of Moving Ice. despite this being a journey that's going to take weeks or even months to travel from Waterdeep, the campaign just hand waves it and says that this is not part of the adventure. So if you really want to role play that, you're completely on your own on how you go about doing that. The goal in this particular quest is to free a sorcerer and convince her to join the fight. And once you accomplish that goal, then the next thing you're going to do is actually go to chapter 5. And in chapter 5, you have several different counterattacks that the cults do. So there's 3 attacks that happen, but they don't all happen at once. They happen at different times during the adventure. So this is the first time we're here, and we're going to do the first attack. And so this is an encounter that plays out here. Once you've completed this counterattack, then you go back to chapter 1. And now we are back at the councils, and we're going to do the second session. And here we're going to talk some more about what's going on. We're going to learn from the characters that we've encountered so far, and we're going to get additional quests to move the story forward. Then it is off to episode 4. So this is actually the second half of this chapter, which has episodes 3 and 4 in it. So we've already done episode 3, and so now we're going to do episode 4, which is also part of this same section. Here we're actually working for the Emerald Enclave, trying to investigate some stuff that's going on in the Misty Forest, and we eventually fight a dragon who fights back a little bit, but runs off once his hit points drop too far. And then we actually move to chapter 6 from here. I hope everybody's keeping up with the locations in the book that we go. So chapter 6, if you thought that the conferences in Waterdeep was not enough talking, then you're in for a treat with this chapter, because this is a conference with the metallic dragons who have heard that there's some stuff going on and they want in on the fight. But they're not just going to join. They are needing the party to come up here and actually engage with this council of dragons and convince them to join the fight and figure out how exactly that's going to work. Once we do this, then we go back to chapter 5, and we're going to run the second attack, which is a counterattack from the cult that kind of puts the party in their place and shows them that the cult is serious. Once we complete that, then we go back to chapter 1, and now we're going to be in the third session. And here we actually the story takes a turn. We're going to talk to all the people that we've got. We've now got the dragons on our side, and we've decided that we're going to take the fight to the cultists themselves. And with that, we decide to move off to chapter 7, where we will find the cultists, and they are at Zonthal's tower. Here we need to infiltrate the cult inside this tower and take back the mask. So there's a map and all the different locations described here. And then afterwards, a blue dragon actually attacks the town nearby, and we have to fight off that blue dragon along the way. And then we actually move directly to episode 8. So we follow from 7 and we go directly to 8. And here we've decided that the red wizards should be involved here. We're going to need their help, but they are evil. So we have to go to them, and we have a very big social encounter to try to convince the red wizards to help us in the fight against Tiamat. And so if you like role-playing, if you like more talking and conferences, we've got another chapter dedicated to that right here. And then once we get through with that, you guessed it, it's back to chapter 5 for that last encounter where the cult makes one final stab at trying to convince the party that to just give it up. So that's the final counterattack that they have. And once we deal with that, we go back to the first chapter and we do the fourth council of Waterdeep, and we make our final plans for how we're going to attack Tiamat and finish this off. So what we have to do is then get that scorecard that we've been tracking along the way and take a final tally of how we did on all of the different quests. And if we succeeded at those quests, then we get a certain number of points. And how we did there determines what kind of help we're going to get from all those different factions and individuals during this final fight. And with that, we then will head to chapter 9. And this is actually where we find Tiamat. And there's a map here of the layout of this lair. And this plays out where there's a large battle going on, because you have these factions and you have these other people fighting with the metallic dragons against these other dragons. So there's a very large battle going on. But during that battle, the party has a specific goal of what they need to accomplish. And so they're going to follow through here. And they're essentially going through here trying to pick up some stuff and make their way to Tiamat and get ready for the final battle. And there's a few things that you have to do in preparation for that battle, but then you do have a final confrontation with Tiamat. And ultimately, presumably, you eventually get Tiamat down to 0 hit points, at which point she does not die. She actually is just dragged back to Avernus. And with that, the chromatic dragons disperse and life returns to normal across the land. And then we get to the appendices, where we have the monster descriptions and the magic items, and then, of course, that council scorecard that's on here. And that is The Rise of Tiamat. So this one is it's 94 pages long. And, you know, if you like role playing and you like talking through a lot of things, then this is probably going to be an adventure that you like just fine. It has its share of combat, and if you like to fight dragons, there's definitely a lot of dragons that you'll get to fight. But there's definitely a lot of talking along the way. It's a departure from Hoard of the Dragon Queen. And what's strange to me is that if you played Hoard of the Dragon Queen and you enjoyed it and you said, oh, well, I can't wait to start the second part of this adventure, then you're probably going to be disappointed, because this is a completely different type of adventure. This is very heavy on the role playing and the social encounters and the intrigue. It is much less about following this path where you're going from one step to the next and building up on this story. So definitely a completely different type of adventure from the first part. It seems like it should have been more of a continuation of the first part, as opposed to two completely different things. It's fine to have an adventure that does that, but to make it so it's part of the same campaign can be a little confusing for folks. So that's my thoughts. I hope you're able to keep up with the jumping around, because this adventure does go all over the place. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you've played it, what did you think of playing it? If you ran it, how hard was it to run it? Because it seems like it'd be a lot to keep track of. I definitely want to hear in the comments what everybody else has to say about The Rise of Tiamat. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you like my videos and the channel, please click subscribe. It really helps me out if you can do that. Click notify if you want to know when I drop another video. Follow me on Mastodon, and I'll be dropping another video pretty much every day. So until next time, take care.